And we are officially live, streaming on all platforms. Welcome to day 4 of Shadow School. I'm your host, Brianne Lee Smiller. And today we are talking about by far one of my favorite gene keys that I have had the pleasure of contemplating so far in my own journey, Gene Key 4, which is the shadow of intolerance, the gift of understanding, and the city or divine gift of forgiveness. I recently worked with this gene key in the practice that I host every Tuesday night for women, where we dance and move through energies and embrace all parts of ourselves, called Strange Magic. And so I created this playlist for this particular gene key. And what ended up happening was I was the only one that showed up that night for a whole bunch of reasons. It was just me. And so I went on my own journey with this particular concept and playlist. And I really sat in this gene key, and especially in the area of forgiveness. And it really sunk into my body what this means and what it feels like. And so I'm really, really jazzed about diving in with you today around this whole gene key. And I have a ton of notes to share, because I have to say, like, some of these, there's a little bit more depth. Some of them I feel like are a little bit like they have one specific aspect to them. And then some of these gene keys feel like they just kind of like continue to blossom and open up. And that's probably my own state of awareness as I'm reading and working with them. They're probably all just beautifully magnificent like that. But this one, for me, really cracked open and blossomed open in my study of it. And so I have so much to share with you. Let's dive in. I'm going to sit here for a minute. The shadow of intolerance. And over the next 2 days too, we're going to dive into impatience and conflict. So like these 3 in a row are like quite a stack of shadows and fears that I'm sure we can all really identify with, pinpoint with laser accuracy a ton of examples in our lives, in ourselves, and in the collective world right now, because there is so much conflict, impatience, and intolerance. And so today, as I dive through this, the energetics of this particular shadow and this gene key overall, I really want to give space for you to reflect and have these insights and recognitions on your own as we go through. The dilemma of this particular gene key in the shadow is reasons, and you'll understand that. Understand is a funny word here. You'll get to see in a second. Basically, humans tend to operate right now in a way where our emotions are actually running the show, and then our minds make this logical structure of a reality and a whole host of reasons as to why we behave the way that we do. When we operate largely unconsciously, our emotions kind of really are the weather that we attach to, identify with, and experience and shape our perception of reality and what's going on. We react on default and show up on default and autopilot, largely, again, driven by that subconscious self and our patterns. And then our mind creates this entire structure of why we did that. We have reasons and justifications for the way that we behaved. We think that we've made logical decisions in our mind. Really, we've been run by our emotions. And what this results in is a lot of overreaction and not a lot of understanding. We decide that what we feel and what we're experiencing and what we see in our individual reality must be the truth, because it's what we're experiencing. And unless we have a larger sense of awareness that we've cultivated through practice, that is it. That is our entire reality. And so it does kind of make a sort of sense that that is what we see as our truth, our subjective truth. You can see how this creates conflict and intolerance in the world very clearly and easily, because everyone is walking around with their own version of a subjective truth, with their own individual reality that they have constructed and that they're living inside of. Now, the problem arises here when we try to get others to agree that our truth and our reality is the truth and the collective truth and reality. And this causes a lot of problem. It causes a lot of conflict. It causes a lot of argument and fighting and war. And it also causes a lot of judgment, resentment, comparisons, right or wrong, good or bad, and the need for us to perpetually seek answers and to prove that we are correct, to justify ourselves that we're correct. So we are living in this subjective inner reality world and a collective world where we have billions of those bumping up against each other. And that means that we have this whole world of intolerance, of judgment and comparison and blame and justification and reasoning and logic. I think like a really good example for this is and how this works is deciding that like something happens, maybe you even just have a bad day and you decide you don't want to do something or you don't like a person. That's like kind of a silly thing. Like think about that. That's kind of a very childish thing to happen. But then what results is that our mind goes through and it creates like a huge ticker tape long list of reasons and excuses that back up that very emotional decision that we made. And then our entire view of the situation is that we have all of these receipts, we have these reasons, we have the proof that it's okay that we act this way, that we made this decision, that we made this choice, that we don't like that person, or we won't do that thing. But really, we've allowed our emotions to then take over the mind processing to construct this whole illusion. It's a distortion. So that's an example of how this starts to play out. The Gene Key says, and I love this, they put it a couple of different ways in the book here, which I think are really helpful. Intolerance is a slanted perspective of logic. Or intolerance is a subjective distortion of logic. And this happens when we give our mental construct the authority to make decisions and to do this rationalization. I know it sounds funny for me to say the mind is not the tool for authority and decision making in our being. It's not. The mind is really good at taking in information and understanding, which we'll get to in a second, sense making of the information, if we can practice more objectivity and actual logic, and communication. It's really good at communication. It's not great at decision making, but we've co-opted it. We've given it the job of being the authority when it's not actually good at that. What it is good at is actual logic, but actual logic requires understanding. You see, logic is supposed to be objective, but when we're run by emotions and we're hyper reactive and running on default in all of our patterning, we are creating a reality for ourselves that is 100% subjective, not objective. We are looking at our own view, our own version, and we are not paying attention to what else is happening out into the world, the other views, the other realities that are being constructed in the very same moment. Logic requires us to understand and be able to look at, without any judgment, all of the opinions, all of the realities, all of the experiences, and again, to not judge them. But we are in this subjective distortion of logic. That's what intolerance is. Now, I want to talk about what that results in. It results in a lot of conflict. It results in taking sides. It results in a lot of proving. It results in a lot of counter arguments. And then we get into this vicious cycle, which we see in society right now, where anybody could argue and prove anything. Ultimately, that's how this works. We can continue to ask questions and seek answers until the cows come home. It's never going to give us what we're actually trying to achieve through that process, which is knowing something, having certainty. I'm sorry. I have bad news for you. You're a human being. You don't get to have the full knowing. You don't get to have full certainty. Part of your work is coming into more trust with the fact that you're a part of everything in a bigger flow, and that knowledge is not the thing that creates safety for you. Having a mental concept of knowledge and answers and certainty on things is not actually what creates solidity and safety. So that's my bad news for you for the day. What we see rise up is actually, we've been talking about like a fear that exists in each of these shadows. With this, it's not one particular fear, although the fear I just shared of never being able to know the answers to things, that you could say is one. But really what we see in this particular gene key, in this shadow, is that there are all sorts of fears that come and play through, generating all these emotions and emotional patterns in us that then kind of they project, not reflect, they project out into the world in this sort of intolerance. And a lot of genetic and ancestral fears fuel this intolerance. And then they get reinforced through defensive mental positions, and sometimes even offensive mental positions where people are like outwardly going out to prove something or to show that they're correct or right. There is no correct or right. Like, we need to let go of that. We need to let go of that. So I'd love for you to just pause here, as I've been sharing a lot, and I have a lot more to share as we get into the repressive and the reactive nature. I want to talk to you a little bit about the gift of understanding and the city of forgiveness before we wrap up. Where in your life are you constantly seeking answers? You're constantly searching for certainty, for clarity, where you're trying to know everything. Where in your life are you trying to prove your version is correct on something? It could be a belief that you have. It could be a way of life that you are living. I often find, this is like a personal example, but I often find that there's a lot of unconscious judgment from others when we make different life decisions than they do. And I find this interesting. So, like, for example, if you're single and a lot of your friends are married, or if you don't have children, a lot of people will ask questions and unconsciously have judgments and kind of opinions about how you are living your life, because it is different from how they've chosen to live theirs. Say they're married or they have children, or it could be the opposite. It could be the opposite direction. It could be somebody that doesn't have children like me projecting onto someone that does have children, and why would they choose to do that? What's interesting to me is that what arises here is that we're like constantly sensing out into our environment and our relationships and other people. Did I make the right choice? Am I certain? And was this the right thing to do? This person has decided to have a very different direction in life. Does that invalidate my direction in life? And then as a result, kind of the questions that are asked are not really questions. They're more judgments or assessments. And it doesn't really invite you into actually understanding the other person. It's just really a projection out of your uncertainty about your own life choices. And what we want is we want to have a mirror in everyone else that they are reinforcing. Oh, we're on the right path. We did the right thing. We made the right choice. We had kids or we didn't have kids. We got married or we didn't get married, whatever it is. And largely it's the prevailing norms in society that are shaping these subconscious projections. But I'm curious, and I invite you to think about, have you ever experienced something like that? Where someone is asking you, so when are you going to have kids? Or I'm using this example because it's my own experience, but you can insert your own. Like, when are you going to find a job that is more stable? Or it could be any number of things. And it's not really a question. It's more them projecting their actual fear and their uncertainty onto you. And they're trying to get that certainty that they've made their choices. But what it does is it projects a subjective reality onto us and out into the world. And then the other person who's receiving that projection feels judged. And then there's like intolerance that flows back the other way. So then we have like intolerance meeting intolerance. And it's all because all of us are unstable and uncertain in the lives and the choices that we've created. And so I'm curious if you've ever experienced anything like this. And I'd love to hear about it if you have. Like, send me a message, shoot me a comment, whatever. And then I want you to think about, like, where are you being restless in your life? Where are you constantly searching outside of yourself? Where are you looking for purpose or the right role or having certain stability before you live the rest of your life? Or you're trying to have a certain outcome before you get to exist in the way that you want to in the world. You're like seeking that stability in your certainty. And as a result, you kind of have an intolerance for yourself. You know, I'll let myself go start this business when I lose weight so that people will think that I'm beautiful enough and will pay attention to me in order to do it. Okay, well, there I've just unearthed like a whole bunch of self-judgments and self-resentments, an intolerance and a seeking and a searching for like what isn't, that prevents me from actually living into my life, and an intolerance for like the self. So I want you to think about that. Like, where are you trying to seek certainty or solidity or resolution somewhere before you fully show up? Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about why this is an issue. It's because mental certainty doesn't actually create safety. It doesn't create certainty in the world. because you can just keep going on and on and on. You can always be disproving and proving and disproving and proving. And so it creates this like restless cycle. And there are two states that emerge here: the repressive state that we talked about, where it's more introverted and it kind of comes in on itself. And here in this shadow, it's apathetic. So instead of constantly seeking and pushing and proving, people with the apathetic, repressive expression will kind of just like give up on trying to find the answers to things and give up on trying to understand things. And as a result, they kind of like dim themselves in a way. They dim their intelligence. They even believe they're less intelligent than others. They're kind of paralyzed in a way. And they have a fear of assuming responsibility for their decisions and their actions and themselves. So responsibility is key here, because responsibility really requires that we move out of a fear and a victim mental structure. And so here, what happens is people here tend to lack motivation. Like they have like a lethargy in a way that's mental, but then also starts to express into their life. And they show up in situations where they don't have any opinions. So the reactive expression, which we'll get to in a second, it's got like an overwhelming amount of opinions and criticisms. The apathetic, repressive state of this shadow really just like has no opinions, has no views, apathetic mind, like nothing is happening there, don't care, don't want to engage with life, don't want to engage with inquiry at all. On the flip side of this, the reactive, expressive, more anger and outward projection based expression is nitpicking. I love that he's chosen that word. Thinking totally rules their life. So much in the mind, so much trying to constantly seek, search, and solve everything, trying to find the right answers, trying to be right all of the time. So they have this eternal need for answers. It's endless. And when they can't find answers, they tend to vent frustration outward to others in the form of anger and blame and resentment and justification, judgment. And they can't let go of this need for a sense of resolution and knowing things and having the answers. Their mind is fully the authority running the show, making the decisions. And they're so disappointed all the time because, as I said, we can't really fully know or understand things through the mind. And so when we try and we push and we force and we try to control it, it just gets worse and worse. Honestly, it builds on itself. And these people tend to then express this and project it out into nitpicking and judging and criticizing, complaining and venting about every single little thing that's happening in the world to themselves. They do it internally too. I'm going to say this is, an expressive, extroverted expression. But you better know that if somebody is judging and complaining and criticizing and nitpicking everything in their external environment with other people, their relationships with the world, that person, making these mean comments on social media, whatever they're doing, you better believe that they are turning that inside as well. And that in there is an inhospitable environment, complete intolerance for self, complete intolerance for other. So I want you to pause here and think, like, are there moments where you've had a feeling of this apathy, this apathetic mind, where you're just like, I don't have an opinion on this? And not because you don't want to have an opinion on it, but just like you don't feel comfortable expressing an opinion on something. You have a fear for asserting an opinion in the world. That's an expression of this. You have a fear of creating a decision and what that will create for you, or this nitpicking where it's like overly judgmental and scrutinizing every little thing. It's always got something to say, where you get to vent out your frustration of not having that safety and solidity in the world. Let's move into the gift, because this is a lot. This is deep, deep shit today. In the shadow of intolerance, if we can recognize that the mind is not the be-all end-all, the mind and having a mental understanding and knowledge and seeking the right answers will never bring us solidity, safety, or peace. Peace, that's the big one. It's never going to bring us peace. Hi, Shannon. Thank you. I love this conversation too. Thanks for joining. It's not going to bring us peace to have all the answers. If we can get to that feeling and perception of life, and that we have created a whole mental construct that we live inside of. Like our mind, our entire mind being as a human creates what we see, what we believe, what we act, what we do. It's our whole world that we've given rise to. If we can understand all of that, and understand is the word, right? We can move into the gift of understanding that emerges out of this intolerance. If we can sit with ourselves too and have tolerance for ourselves here, we can move into understanding. Now, understanding is not a mental game. It is a being game. In fact, when you look at the actual etymology of the word understanding, it really is like you're among something. It's like you're inside of, you're standing in something, not necessarily under. It's actually like you're standing among something. So imagine that, like, to understand something is to literally sit inside of it, to stand inside of it. When I have this visual of that as a concept, it's like the ultimate empathy. Understanding becomes the ultimate form of empathy, like to actually sit in something, to get it, to be it with our whole being, not just like getting it with our mind, not just knowing it with our mind. That's what we're moving into. When we can understand, sit inside of it, have empathy, we actually can be more objective and use logic in the way that it is intended to be used, which is objective evaluation of all sides, stories, experiences, options, opinions, truths. And only from that perspective do we have a sense of actual understanding and acceptance. And so here, from this perspective, we actually can allow the mind to do a role that it's really great at. In addition to communicating, it's really good at understanding. And in this sense, what understanding means is it's great at seeing logical patterns and using logic to examine and see and understand patterns that exist. And I don't mean patterns that we're creating and projecting. I mean natural patterns. So in effect, the mind becomes this great tool where we get to interface with and actually see the reality of the patterns around us that we are a part of, which is really freaking cool. And so I want to pause again and allow that to sink in. This concept of understanding, of being inside of having like real empathy and logic together. That can bring us more of a sense of peace and a feeling, like a cellular feeling of safety and solidity. Not the mind, not mental knowing, not mental seeking and searching and trying to find answers. Okay, I'm going to move us into the city of forgiveness, which is just beyond, is the word. It's beyond understanding. It's just so lovely. The cities are a state of being, and siddhi is Siddhi. That's how it's spelled. And another like kind of interpretation of that is divine gift. And so these are such a high frequency state where it is just a pure state of beingness, and words fall away. And so we do our best to describe this state and to talk about it, to work with it, but it is a being state. Forgiveness is not something that we do then. It's not something that we give or receive. I'm going to repeat that. Forgiveness is not something we do. It is not something that we give, and it is not something that we receive. Forgiveness is something that we be in the world. Like so many of these things that we seek externally and think that we need to get or give or receive, it's actually something that's generated within, and it's a state of beingness. And what forgiveness does in its ultimate form is it actually ripples outward. If we can be a state of forgiveness in the world, it dissolves all separation, it dissolves all judgment and criticism and intolerance. It dissolves all need for understanding itself. So not only do we no longer need to have the mental answers to know. In forgiveness, we no longer even need to understand anything. We move beyond the need for understanding. What's beautiful about the concept of forgiveness is that it not only operates in the present moment. Forgiveness is a dissolving force that ripples and radiates out and through space and time. So it has a quantum effect to it, this ripple effect, or the butterfly effect, where it can affect things that we don't even know in time and space. But what it does is it actually works and forgives karma. It forgives our debts and trespasses. And it can forgive ancestral karma, genetic karma that we've been carrying throughout lifetimes and generations. And so forgiveness is like such a stunning force to work with and a stunning force to be in. And here we can simply see the world as it is, in this state of love and unity and beingness. We can stop trying to make meaning of the world that we live in and allow it to just be, and allow it to show us what it is. It's literally just simply seeing the world as it is, as opposed to having our meaning onto it. And it really allows us to see our relationships without any reasons, any expectations, without any blame. Getting to a state of beingness around forgiveness allows us to practice the art of returning non-love with love. If we're still in a victim mentality, a state of consciousness, a state where we're blaming, where we are assigning responsibility to someone else for a situation that we are in, then we're not really in the state where we can offer forgiveness for ourselves or for others, because we're not assuming responsibility. And what we are doing is we are seeing the world in this narrow mental construct that we've created. And we're seeing ourselves there, and we're seeing other people there in the version of them that we've created in our mental construct. But what really exists on the larger plane here is souls and energy and love. Not this individual separation, not these tiny worlds that we've created for ourselves as individuals. And so being in a state of forgiveness really requires that we dissolve away any victimization, any judgments that we're holding, any blames, any guilts, but also the reasons, the expectations, and the blame, the being a victim and being victimized or victimizing others, all of that falls away, and we actually get to see what is true, which is that everything is love and we're all connected, we're all one. And when we can see this bigger version of ourselves, then we can return non-love with love. Even if the other person we're interacting with is not capable of recognizing that in themselves or in you in the moment, you can remember yourself there. You can remember and anchor into your higher self. This is what higher self leadership is all about. You remembering how big you are and what you are really a part of, and then recognizing you are actually operating with the same version, the same huge, magnificent version of others. You are not working with this tiny little distorted illusion of other people. Because when you are working with this tiny little distortion of other people, you're in the distortion. You're in the intolerance. You're in the victimization. You're not in responsibility, and you're not in a state of being able to forgive. Big sigh here. So we've got to have this like utter self-responsibility here in forgiveness. I have had some like personal experience with forgiveness recently, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here because it's still pretty fresh. And so I want to make sure that I'm representing it in a way that is useful and valuable for others as a story and example. But I will share that big life circumstances are changing for a lot of people right now. Jobs are being lost and wars are being waged. And every time I talk to someone, it seems like trauma, drama, and a huge losses being had all around. You know, people are losing family members, people are losing their pets, people are losing their jobs, their homes. It's our lives are kind of like deconstructing in a way. Our reality is seeming to deconstruct in such a way, and we are at this inflection point. It seems like we keep coming up against it over and over, where we can judge what's happening and place blame and guilt and resentment on others for the situations that we are encountering that are happening in the world. Or we can do the work to remember ourselves and to rise into a state of peace and grace and forgiveness. And for the past few months, I've really been confronting that myself with a particular issue where I could see objectively that I was blaming. Like, I'm to the point where if I can consciously work with a concept that I'm grappling with, then that means I can see it and almost have like this dialogue happening where a judgment, a blame will rise up, and I'm like, oh, I'm blaming. Okay, why am I blaming? What's behind the blaming? The blaming is not where I want to be. This intolerance for others is not where I want to be. But there's something where I'm like, okay, I'm not quite ready to release it yet. And so for the past several weeks, I've been working through that with a particular concept and situation. And finally, and I was like, I want forgiveness here. I want forgiveness. I want to be able to dissolve this and release it, because ultimately clinging to a blame is disempowering. Clinging to a blame and a justification and reasons and judgments, it keeps us in our pain and suffering. It keeps us in a lower frequency. It keeps us in the place where we think things are being done to us. And I knew that I didn't want to be there. I want to be in a place where I'm not holding on and attaching myself to judgments and blame. I want to be in a place where I'm coming from a state of unconditional love. I remember the biggest part of myself, and I can see beyond what is happening in this small reality that I'm interfacing with to the unconditional love and the being that I'm interacting with. Hey, Tia. And so finally, I want to say maybe 10 days ago now, I was driving in my car and listening to a song, and I just had this wave of forgiveness roll through, and it just feels like a melting and a dissolving. And then I allowed myself to come to a full place of neutrality about the entire situation. And that's ultimately what we want to get to, neutrality. And from neutrality, we can choose love and patience and peace and joy and how we show up, even in difficult situations, even in situations that would have disempowered us in the past, even in situations that are tough, where we're experiencing big grief or loss or change or disruption. And so I want to offer to you that working with this particular gene key, examining intolerance and where you're holding it for yourself and others, moving into this concept of understanding and being inside of having full empathy and being able to actually work with logic to see all of the situation. And then allowing also to not attach to that, to move into a state of beingness that is forgiveness. Hi, Yemi. And to then just let it all dissolve. There is no need for understanding. There is no need for answers. There is no need for reasons or justifications. And dang it, I think that's what humanity needs so much. We need more self-forgiveness. We need more forgiveness and recognition of others as being us. There's nothing apart from us. And we need more practice of returning non-love with love. So that's what is on offer for you in contemplating this gene key. We've gone pretty long today, and I had many pages of notes. So if you stuck it out for this conversation, I appreciate you. Thank you for joining me. And tomorrow we will be back with another episode of Shadow School. Have an amazing weekend. Oh, wait. Actually, I have an announcement. I totally forgot. One last thing. I'm putting together a program, 6-week immersive group program, where we are going to explore the energetics of setting beautiful boundaries. Thanks, Shannon. Ooh, what the heck is a beautiful boundary? I'm going to release a podcast episode later, I think today or tomorrow, that dives into what the heck I'm talking about as it relates to beautiful boundaries. But basically, in doing all this studying around the gene keys and tolerance and conflict and peace and forgiveness, the boundaries advice that exists out into the world has really started to rub me the wrong way. I have intolerance for it. And it's because the energetics are really rooted in victimization and separation and creating distance and creating walls between each other. And we need less walls between each other right now. And so I really started to percolate and work with this concept of what would it look like if we could build beautiful boundaries that were permeable, that actually invited us into having responsibility for doing our own work, but also invited others into a vulnerable way of us doing this work with us, so that they could support us on doing our work, as opposed to us kind of trying to control behaviors of others or judge behaviors of others or co-opt others into changing so we could stay comfortable. And so I don't have a date yet, but I'm just starting to create a wait list right now for this concept of beautiful boundaries as this program. And so if you're interested, I will post the link to sign up to get on the wait list. And I'm really excited about it. I just put together a page describing it, talking about it in more detail on my website last night. So I'll share it with you now. It's at museandmethod, all spelled out, .com/boundaries. And I'll post the link also, but I'd be really excited if you're interested in deepening the work and like actually going into the energetics and understanding how you interact with conflict and peace and tolerance and patience and all these concepts, and then how you can actually get the skills to set beautiful boundaries that create connection with others instead of separation. That's the game. That's what we're going for. So I'd be so thrilled if you are interested in signing up for that program. I'll share more details. And that ends then Shadow School. Thanks for joining me.